In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world sleeps and the veil between dimensions grows thin, a man sat in his modest apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. The year was 1948, and while the world outside buzzed with post-war reconstruction and the birth of new nations, this man was occupied with something far more revolutionary. He was mapping the architecture of human consciousness itself, discovering that within the simple act of breathing lay the master key to all transformation. This man had stumbled upon a secret so profound, so earth-shattering in its implications, that it would challenge everything humanity believed about the nature of reality. He had learned that consciousness is not produced by the brain, as science insisted, but that consciousness is the very substance of all creation. More startling still, he had discovered that every human being possesses the power to reshape their entire world through a technique so simple it could be dismissed as child's play, yet so potent it could move mountains. The secret he uncovered was this: there exists a state of consciousness he called the wish fulfilled. And access to this state requires nothing more than understanding how to breathe from the end of your desire rather than from the beginning of your want. In this state, what you seek is not hoped for or worked toward. It is lived from, breathed from, assumed as already accomplished fact. But here lies the great mystery that consumed his life's work. Why, if such power exists within every human being, do so few ever discover it? Why do people live entire lifetimes in states of wanting, hoping, struggling, when they could just as easily live from states of having, knowing, being? The answer, he realized, lay not in the complexity of the technique, but in the radical simplicity that our educated minds reject. You see, we have been taught to believe, that reality comes to us from the outside, that we must adapt to circumstances, that we must accept what life gives us. We have been trained to think that change requires effort, time, and favorable external conditions. But what if all of this was backwards? What if reality actually flows from consciousness outward, and what we call the external world is simply consciousness pushed out, crystallized into form? This man discovered that when you assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled, when you literally breathe from that state of consciousness, your outer world has no choice but to reorganize itself to match your inner conviction. The breath becomes the bridge between who you think you are and who you truly are. It becomes the vehicle by which consciousness shifts from one state to another. The implications stagger the mind. If consciousness is the only reality, then every condition, every relationship, every circumstance in your life is nothing more than consciousness expressed. Change your consciousness, change your world, but not through visualization or positive thinking or hoping, through assumption, through daring to live from the end, through breathing as the person who already possesses what you currently desire. This is not theory or philosophy, but he persisted in his assumption, breathing from the state of health so completely that he forgot what it felt like to be sick. Within months, his tests began showing improvement. Within a year, his doctors could find no trace of the condition they had declared incurable. He had breathed himself into a different state of being, and his body had followed. Then there was the couple whose marriage had deteriorated into cold warfare. Each partner assumed the other was the problem, breathing from states of resentment, disappointment, and blame. Their every interaction reinforced their assumptions about each other's inadequacies. They were living in states of mutual unworthiness, and their relationship perfectly reflected those states. When the woman learned about assumption, she realized she had been creating her marriage experience through her own consciousness. Instead of trying to change her husband, she began assuming the state of being in a loving, harmonious relationship. She breathed from the feeling of being cherished, appreciated, and deeply connected to her partner. She did not pretend her husband was different. She did not deny their current difficulties. She simply assumed the state of love, fulfilled, and breathed from that state. She lived from the feeling of being in the marriage she desired rather than the marriage she was experiencing. Her husband began changing without her saying a word. The same man who had been cold and distant became warm and attentive. The same person who had seemed incapable of appreciation began expressing gratitude. Nothing about him had actually changed except her assumption about him, but that change in consciousness created an entirely different experience of the relationship. But we must also examine the failures to understand the deeper principles at work. There was the man who tried to assume wealth while continuing to complain. In about his poverty, his conscious assumption was contradicted by his habitual conversation. Every time he spoke about his lack, he was breathing from the state of poverty, reinforcing the very condition he claimed to want to change. There was the woman who assumed the state of being loved while harboring deep resentment toward her ex-husband. She could not assume love while feeling hatred. Consciousness is one. You cannot successfully assume one state while habitually dwelling in its opposite. The technique revealed their actual assumptions, not their hoped-for assumptions. The man actually assumed poverty and breathed from lack despite his conscious efforts. The woman actually assumed resentment and breathed from hatred despite her desire for love. The technique worked perfectly. It created their actual assumptions, not their imagined ones. This is why honest self-examination is essential. What do you actually assume? What do you really believe about yourself? What states do you habitually occupy? These are revealed not by your conscious desires, but by your consistent experiences. Your life is the perfect mirror of your assumptions. Now we must address how this ancient wisdom applies to the challenges of modern life. We live in an age of unprecedented complexity where the pace of change seems to accelerate daily, where old certainties crumble and new realities emerge constantly. Traditional approaches to success, happiness, and fulfillment often seem inadequate to address contemporary challenges. In this context, the breath technique becomes not just useful, but essential. When external conditions change rapidly, when economic systems fluctuate wildly, when social structures undergo constant transformation, the ability to assume any state of consciousness and live from it becomes the ultimate security. You are no longer dependent on external conditions for your internal experience. The modern workplace demands adaptability, creativity, and resilience. Those who master the art of assumption find themselves naturally developing these qualities. When you can assume the state of being valuable, innovative, and unshakable, you become these things regardless of external circumstances. Your inner state creates opportunities that simply do not exist for those trapped in states of insecurity and limitation. Relationships in the modern world face pressures unknown to previous generations. Social media creates artificial comparisons. Geographic mobility disrupts traditional community bonds. Cultural changes challenge established relationship models. In this environment, the ability to assume states of love, connection, and harmony becomes crucial for creating meaningful relationships. The man who assumes he is lovable attracts love. The woman who assumes she is worthy of respect receives respect. The couple who jointly assume their relationship is blessed with harmony experience that harmony. They are not trying to get these things from each other or from the world. They are breathing from these states and allowing their reality to conform. Mental health challenges that seem endemic to mode in life, anxiety, depression, existential meaninglessness, often stem from habitually occupying limiting states of consciousness. The anxious person assumes danger and breathes from fear. The depressed person assumes hopelessness and breathes from despair. The meaningless person assumes purposelessness and breathes from emptiness. The breath technique offers a direct path to different states. You need not analyze why you feel anxious. Simply assume the state of peace and breathe from it. You need not understand the source of your depression. Assume the state of joy and live from it. You need not find your purpose. Assume the state of being purposeful and let that assumption create its own fulfillment. This is not denial or positive thinking. This is the recognition that consciousness creates experience and that by changing consciousness through assumption, you must change experience. The anxious feelings were created by assumptions of danger. Peace is created by assumptions of safety. Depression was created by assumptions of hopelessness. Joy is created by assumptions of infinite possibility. Even global challenges like climate change, political polarization, and economic inequality can only be addressed by consciousness. Those who assume states of solution consciousness, cooperation consciousness, and abundance consciousness become channels through which new realities emerge. Change begins in consciousness before it appears in form. The breath technique scales from personal transformation to collective transformation. As more individuals learn to assume states of harmony rather than conflict, peace rather than war, abundance rather than scarcity, the collective consciousness of humanity shifts. You are not just changing your personal reality, you are contributing to the transformation of human civilization itself. This brings us to the ultimate realization, the final recognition that changes everything. You are not a separate individual trying to get something from the world. You are consciousness itself, temporarily localized in a particular form, possessing infinite creative power. The breath technique is simply consciousness teaching itself how to create consciously rather than unconsciously. When you truly understand that consciousness is the only reality, that you are consciousness, that your assumptions create your world, then the technique becomes as natural as breathing itself. You do not need to remember to assume your wish fulfilled. You simply live from the state of fulfillment. You do not need to practice breathing from desired states. You naturally breathe from the state of having rather than wanting. This is the invitation before you now. Not to learn another technique, not to add another practice to your collection, but to awaken to what you already are. You are infinite consciousness. with the power to assume any state and live from it. The breath is simply the bridge between forgetting this truth and remembering it. Right now, in this moment, you can assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled. You can breathe from the state of already being what you long to become. You can live from the end rather than struggle toward it. This is not something you might do someday when conditions are right. This is something you can do now, because consciousness needs no permission, no preparation, no special circumstances to assume any state it chooses. The question is not whether this works. The question is whether you will apply it. The question is not whether you have the power. The question is whether you will claim it. The question is not whether you can assume your wish fulfilled. The question is whether you will dare to live from that assumption until your world conforms. Everything you have ever desired is already yours in consciousness. Every state you long to experience is available to you now through assumption. Every condition you wish to change can be changed by assuming its opposite and breathing from that new state. This is not theory. This is not philosophy. This is the fundamental creative principle of existence itself. The breath you are taking right now can be the breath of someone who already has what you want. The feeling you have right now can be shifted to the feeling of wish fulfilled. The person you think you are right now can be transformed into the person you long to become simply by assuming you already are that person and breathing from that assumption. There is no process to complete, no healing to accomplish, no prerequisites to fulfill. There is only this moment and your willingness to assume your wish fulfilled in this moment. From this assumption, breathed into reality through conscious breathing, your entire world must reshape itself to match your inner conviction. This is the secret the mystics guarded, the power the ancients knew, the technique that changes everything. One simple breath taken from the state of the wish fulfilled has the power to transform your entire reality. The only question remaining is this: will you take that breath? This is not wishful thinking or New Age fantasy. This is the most practical of all practical knowledge, tested and proven in the laboratory of countless lives. Yet it remains hidden in plain sight, rejected by minds that have been conditioned to seek complexity where stunning simplicity exists. The breath technique this man discovered allows you to enter what he called the Sabbath of the mind, that holy state where all effort ceases because the work is already done. In this state, you do not try to get something. You discover you already are something. You do not hope for change. You find yourself changed. You do not wait for evidence. You become the evidence. The ancients knew this secret and encoded it in their sacred texts. They spoke of the breath of life, the divine wind, the spirit that moved upon the waters of creation. They understood that breath was not merely the exchange of gases, but the very mechanism by which the invisible becomes visible, by which the formless takes form. They knew that God breathed into man the breath of life, and man became a living soul, not just alive, but a creative being capable of breathing new realities into existence. Yet somewhere in our journey from ancient wisdom to modern sophistication, we lost this understanding. We began to worship the effect rather than recognize our power as the cause. We became hypnotized by the world of appearances, forgetting that we are the ones doing the appearing. We started believing in luck, chance, fate, and circumstance, when all along we possessed the power to assume any state of being and live from it. The man who rediscovered this lost art understood that most people fail in their attempts at transformation because they try to change their outer world while remaining unchanged within themselves. They want wealth while feeling poor. They desire love while assuming unworthiness. They seek heat, all while dwelling in illness. But consciousness will always outpicture itself. You cannot be one thing on the inside and experience something entirely different on the outside. This is why the breath technique he taught was not about getting something from the world, but about becoming someone who already has it. The technique allows you to breathe yourself into a completely different state of consciousness, to literally become, through the power of assumption, the person for whom your desire is not a future possibility, but a present fact. The foundation of this revolutionary understanding rests upon what he called the law of assumption. This law states that whatever you assume to be true, whether it appears true to your senses or not, will harden into fact if you persist in your assumption. Your assumptions create your reality. Your beliefs about yourself and your world literally become your world. But here we must understand something crucial. This law was not his invention or discovery. It is as old as consciousness itself, as fundamental as the law of gravity. It has been operating in your life since the day you were born, whether you knew it or not. Every condition you now experience is the result of assumptions you have made about yourself and your world. The question is not whether the law works. It works constantly, perfectly, automatically. The question is whether you will consciously direct it or unconsciously submit to it. Throughout history, those who achieved what others deemed impossible understood this secret, though they may not have articulated it in these terms. They lived from the assumption of their fulfilled desire. They breathed from the state of already being what they wished to become. They did not hope their dreams would come true. They assumed them as already true and lived from that assumption until the outer world conformed. The mystics of old knew this secret and preserved it in their writings, though they often clothed it in symbol and parable to protect it from those who might misuse it. The Kabbalists spoke of the four worlds of creation, understanding that what happens in the highest world of pure consciousness must eventually manifest in the lowest world of physical form. The Christian mystics taught that the kingdom of heaven is within, that as you believe, so it is done unto you. The Hindu sages declared that the self is Brahman, that individual consciousness and universal consciousness are one. But knowledge, no matter how profound, remains powerless until it is applied. And here we encounter the great challenge. How do you move from understanding this truth intellectually to experiencing it practically? How do you shift from hoping it might work to knowing it must work? How do you transform from someone who wishes for change to someone who assumes change and lives from it? The answer lies in understanding the nature of states of consciousness. You are not a fixed personality trapped in permanent conditions. You are pure consciousness, temporarily occupying a particular state. States are not permanent. They are simply where your attention habitually rests. And attention, through the power of assumption, can be moved. Every state of consciousness has its own feeling, its own set of thoughts, its own way of perceiving the world. The state of poverty feels different from the state of wealth. The state of loneliness feels different from the state of love. The state of sickness feels different from the state of health. These are not just different thoughts or emotions. These are entirely different worlds of experience. Most people live in reactive states, allowing circumstances to determine their consciousness. When something good happens, they feel good. When something bad happens, they feel bad. They are like thermometers, constantly registering the temperature of their environment. But consciousness operating through assumption is like a thermostat. It sets the temperature and maintains it regardless of external conditions. The breath technique provides the bridge between states. Through conscious breathing combined with assumption, you can move from any state you currently occupy to any state you choose to experience. You are not trying to feel better about your current circumstances. You are not trying to improve your present state. You are moving into an entirely different state of consciousness, one in which what you desire is not desired but possessed. This is not make-believe or self-deception. This is the recognition that consciousness is the only reality, and that by changing your consciousness, you must change your world. The outer world has no choice but to conform to consciousness. This is law, this is principle, this is the way creation works. When you truly understand this, you realize that you have never been the victim of circumstances. You have always been the author of your experience, though unconsciously so. Every condition in your life, every relationship, every limitation, every freedom, all of it has been created by your assumptions about yourself and your world. Change your assumptions and you must change your world. The breath becomes your vehicle for this transformation, because breath is the most intimate connection between your conscious mind and your subconscious mind, between your individual awareness and the infinite consciousness that you are. When you breathe consciously from the state of the wish fulfilled, you are not just changing your thoughts, you are changing your very identity. This is why the technique is so simple yet so powerful. It bypasses the analytical mind that would argue and doubt. It speaks directly to the creative power within you that knows only to create what you assume to be true. The subconscious does not reason or argue. It simply accepts your assumptions and creates accordingly. But here we must address the great resistance that arises when consciousness encounters this truth. Your rational mind will rebel. It will insist that this is impossible, that you cannot simply assume something and have it become real. It will demand proof, evidence, scientific validation. It will catalog all the reasons why this cannot work, all the times you have tried and failed, all the ways you are different from those who succeeded. This resistance is natural and expected. You have been conditioned from birth to believe that reality is fixed, that you are small and powerless, that change requires struggle and time and favorable conditions. These beliefs run deep and they will not surrender without a fight. But they are only beliefs, only assumptions that have been accepted as true, and any assumption can be changed by persistently assuming something different. The key is to remember that you are not trying to convince your rational mind. You are not seeking to prove anything to anyone, including yourself. You are simply assuming your wish fulfilled and breathing from that state. You are living from the end, feeling from the end, being from the end. Whether it makes sense to the logical mind is irrelevant. Logic is based on past experience. Assumption creates new experience. This brings us to the heart of the matter, the technique itself. But before revealing this sacred method, we must understand why breath has been revered across all cultures and throughout all ages as the bridge between the mortal and the divine. The ancients did not see breath as merely a biological function. They recognized it as the very essence of life itself, the invisible thread connecting individual consciousness to the infinite source of all creation. In the Hebrew tradition, the word for breath and spirit are the same, ruach. When the scriptures speak of God breathing into Adam the breath of life, they are describing the moment when infinite consciousness individualized itself, when the universal became personal while remaining universal. The breath of God became the breath of man, and in that breath lies all creative power. The Sanskrit term prana means not just breath, but life force itself, the subtle energy that animates all existence. The ancient yogis understood that by controlling the breath, one could control the mind, and by controlling the mind, one could control reality itself. They developed elaborate breathing techniques, not for physical health alone, but for conscious mastery over the creative forces of existence. The Greeks spoke of pneuma, the divine breath that was both air and spirit, both the breath in your lungs and the breath of the gods. They understood that this divine breath was the substance of all creation, and that by learning to breathe consciously, one could participate directly in the creative process. But all of these traditions, in their own way, were pointing to the same fundamental truth that we must now make practical. Breath is the vehicle by which consciousness moves from one state to another. It is the bridge between who you are and who you can become. It is the means by which the invisible becomes visible, the desired becomes actual, the possible becomes inevitable. The technique itself is deceptively simple. Simplicity, however, is not to be confused with ease. The technique requires nothing more than your willingness to assume your wish already fulfilled and to breathe from that state of fulfillment. But this assumption must be total, complete, unwavering. You are not pretending. You are not visualizing. You are not hoping. You are assuming, taking for granted that what you are is already accomplished fact. Here is how it works. First, you must become clear about what you truly desire. Not what you think you should desire, not what others expect you to desire, but what your heart genuinely longs for. This desire must be specific enough to evoke feeling, yet general enough to allow consciousness infinite ways to fulfill it. You are not trying to control the how, you are assuming the what. Once your desire is clear, you enter into a state of relaxed attention. This is not meditation in the traditional sense. You are not trying to empty your mind or achieve some mystical state. You are simply becoming still enough to shift your attention from your current circumstances to your fulfilled desire. You are moving your awareness from what is to what you assume to be. Now comes the crucial element, the assumption itself. You must dare to assume that your desire is already fulfilled. Not that it will be fulfilled, not that it might be fulfilled, but that it is fulfilled now, in this moment, as a present fact. This requires a complete shift in consciousness. You are no longer the person who wants something. You have become the person who has it. And here is where the breath becomes your vehicle. As you assume your wish fulfilled, you begin to breathe from that state. Your breath becomes the breath of a person who already possesses what you formerly desired. You breathe with the rhythm, the depth, the quality of someone who has nothing left to want because everything is already fulfilled. This is not a breathing exercise in the usual sense. You are not counting breaths or following prescribed patterns. You are breathing from a different state of being entirely. Your breath reflects your inner state, and as you assume fulfillment, your breath naturally becomes the breath of fulfillment. Deep, satisfied, complete. Feel what it would feel like to already have what you desire. Not the excitement of getting it, but the quiet satisfaction of having it. Not the thrill of anticipation, but the calm confidence of possession. Not the energy of wanting, but the peace of being. Breathe from this feeling. Let your breath carry the quality of fulfillment, the essence of completion. As you maintain this state through conscious breathing, something remarkable begins to happen. Your entire nervous system starts to reorganize itself around this new assumption. Your subconscious mind accepts this new state as fact and begins the process of creating circumstances that match your assumption. Your intuition becomes attuned to opportunities that align with your new state of consciousness. The duration of the technique is less important than the quality of assumption. Some find that a few minutes of truly assuming their wish fulfilled is sufficient. Others may need longer to fully inhabit the new state. The key is not the time spent, but the completeness of your assumption during that time. This technique has been tested in the laboratory of countless lives, and its effectiveness has been proven over and over again. But these are not merely success stories. They are demonstrations of consciousness in action, examples of what becomes possible when assumption is applied with understanding and persistence. Consider the businessman who had been struggling for years to build his company, working 18-hour days but seeing little progress. He learned this technique and each evening would assume the feeling of being the successful executive he longed to become. He would breathe from the state of having already achieved his goals, feeling the satisfaction of success, the confidence of accomplishment. Within months, opportunities began appearing that had never existed before. Contacts emerged from unexpected places. Deals materialized that seemed impossible. His outer world reorganized itself to match his inner assumption. Or the woman who had been alone for years, believing herself unlovable, assuming that true companionship was for others but not for her. She learned to assume the feeling of being deeply loved, cherished, appreciated. Each day she would breathe from the state of being in a loving relationship, feeling the warmth of being truly seen and valued. She did not visualize a specific person or try to manipulate circumstances. She simply assumed the state of being loved and breathed from that state. Love found her in ways she could never have planned or predicted. Then there was the artist who had talent but no recognition, creating beautiful work that no one seemed to notice or value. He learned to assume the feeling of being a celebrated artist, breathing from the state of having his work acknowledged and appreciated. He felt the satisfaction of artistic success, the joy of touching others through his creativity. Soon galleries began reaching out. Critics started taking notice. His assumption had created the very recognition he had assumed. But we must also examine the cases where the technique appeared to fail, for these reveal deeper truths about how consciousness operates. There was the man who tried to assume wealth while secretly believing himself unworthy of prosperity. His conscious assumption was overruled by his deeper conviction of unworthiness. The technique did not fail. It revealed his true assumption. There was the woman who assumed health while harboring resentment and anger. Her assumption of physical healing was contradicted by her assumption of emotional poison. Consciousness is one. You cannot assume one thing on the surface while assuming something different in the depths and expect the surface assumption to prevail. The technique works perfectly every time, but it works on your actual assumptions, not on your hoped-for assumptions. If you assume limitation, you will experience limitation. If you assume lack, you will experience lack. If you assume unworthiness, you will experience unworthiness. The law does not judge your assumptions, it simply creates them. This is why honest self-examination is crucial. What do you really assume about yourself? What do you actually believe you deserve? What do you truly expect from life? These deeper assumptions will always override your surface desires. The technique of breathing from the wish fulfilled only works when your assumption is genuine, when it comes from your core rather than from your hopes. But here we encounter a disturbing truth that explains why this knowledge remains hidden despite its power. There are forces at work in our world that benefit from keeping consciousness asleep, from maintaining the illusion that power lies outside ourselves, from convincing us that we are victims rather than creators. From the moment you are born, you are systematically trained to look outside yourself for validation, for security, for meaning, for worth. The educational system teaches you to seek approval from authorities rather than to trust your own inner knowing. Religious institutions often promote dependence on external salvation rather than recognition of indwelling divinity. Economic systems are built on manufactured scarcity and artificial limitation. The media bombards you with images of what you should want, how you should look, what success means, what happiness requires. But notice, all of these messages assume that you lack something, that you are incomplete, that you need something outside yourself to be whole. This is not accidental. This is conditioning designed to keep you in states of wanting rather than states of having Consumer culture depends entirely on keeping you dissatisfied with what you are and what you have. If you truly understood that consciousness is the only reality, that you already contain everything you seek, that you can assume any state and live from it, the entire economic system would collapse. How could they sell you solutions to lack if you realized you are already complete? Political systems maintain control by convincing you that change comes from external authorities rather than from inner transformation. They promise to fix your problems, to create the conditions for your happiness, to provide the security you seek. But they can only offer these things if you first accept that you do not already possess them. They thrive on your assumption of powerlessness. Even well-meaning spiritual and self-help teachings often perpetuate this conditioning by suggesting that you need something more techniques, more knowledge, more practices, more healing before you can claim your power. They keep you seeking rather than being, hoping rather than assuming, trying rather than succeeding. The conspiracy is not organized by shadowy figures in secret meetings. It is maintained by the collective unconscious acceptance of limitation. Every time someone assumes they are powerless, they strengthen the morphic field of powerlessness. Every time someone accepts that change is difficult, they contribute to the mass belief in struggle. Every time someone agrees that external conditions determine internal experience, they reinforce the illusion of victim consciousness. But the conspiracy runs deeper still. Your own ego participates in this conditioning because assuming full responsibility for your consciousness is terrifying to the part of you that wants to remain small and safe. It is easier to blame circumstances than to acknowledge that you created them through your assumptions. It is more comfortable to hope for rescue than to recognize that you are your own savior. The ego prefers complex solutions to simple ones because complexity makes it feel important. It would rather spend years in therapy exploring your past than one moment assuming your wish fulfilled. It would rather engage in elaborate rituals and practices than dare to simply breathe from the state of having what you want. Complexity keeps the ego busy and important. Simplicity renders it unnecessary. This is why the breath technique is so threatening to establish patterns of thinking. It is too simple. It puts too much power in your hands. It eliminates the need for intermediaries, experts, and authorities. It makes you responsible for your own experience. It reveals that you have always been the one creating your reality, whether consciously or unconsciously. The technique cannot be monetized, copyrighted, or controlled. It cannot be made into a program, a certification, or a franchise. It belongs to consciousness itself, and consciousness is what you are. No one can give it to you because you already have it. No one can teach it to you because you already know it. You can only remember what you have temporarily forgotten. Yet despite these forces of conditioning, despite the conspiracy of consciousness against itself, there are those who break through. There are individuals who discover this technique and apply it with such conviction that their entire reality transforms. These are not special people with unique gifts. These are ordinary human beings who dared to assume their wish fulfilled and persist in that assumption until their world conformed. The laboratory of consciousness is always open, and every individual life is an experiment in assumption. The results speak for themselves, though they are often dismissed as coincidence, luck, or natural progression by those who cannot accept the radical implications of what they witness. There was the young woman, barely 25, drowning in debt and working multiple jobs just to survive. She had grown up believing that money was scarce, that she was not the kind of person who could be wealthy, that financial struggle was her lot in life. These were not just thoughts she held. These were states of consciousness she inhabited daily, breathing from the feeling of lack, assuming scarcity with every breath. When she learned the technique, she began a simple practice. Each evening she would assume the feeling of being financially free, not rich, not wealthy beyond measure, but simply free from financial worry. She would breathe from the state of having enough, from the peace of knowing her needs were met, from the confidence of someone who never worried about money because money was never a problem. The change did not happen overnight. For weeks, nothing seemed different. Her rational mind mocked the practice. Her circumstances remained unchanged. But she persisted in her assumption, breathing daily from the state of financial freedom, living from the end rather than from the beginning. Then opportunities began appearing. A skill she had ever considered valuable suddenly became highly sought after. Connections formed with people who needed exactly what she could provide. Money began flowing from directions she had never expected. Within 6 months, her financial reality had completely transformed, not through her efforts to make money, but through her assumption of already having enough breathing itself into form. Consider the man in his 50s who had been diagnosed with a condition his doctors called incurable. For years, he had assumed the identity of a sick person, breathing from the state of illness, feeling from the state of limitation, thinking from the state of decline. His every breath carried the assumption of disease, and his body faithfully reflected that assumption. When he encountered this teaching, he made a radical decision. He would no longer assume the state of sickness. Instead, he would assume the state of perfect health. Each day, he would breathe from the feeling of vitality, from the confidence of someone whose body worked perfectly, from the gratitude of someone who had never known illness. His doctors were skeptical. His family was concerned. His rational mind resisted.